Hello and welcome to the latest webinar. So just adjust my screen slightly there so I can see a bit better. This is a recording of a webinar that we presented last week. For technical reasons, we've had to re-record it. So unfortunately, the chat option is not available. But the subject for this latest webinar is the issues arising from part-time furloughed employees. So as from 1st of July 2020, it's been possible to bring back employees who were previously furloughed to work on a part-time basis and still make a claim for the amount of hours that they remain furloughed. It's not quite a straightforward calculation, which I'll get into in due course. But previously to this, anybody who was furloughed was not allowed to work at all for the employer, other than for training purposes. So now that employees can be brought back, there are certain restrictions on the way that these people can be treated, and the employment law implications also come into play. So firstly, I shall share my screen, which has some slides on there. And if I just open this first slide, which, so I mentioned from 1st of July 2020, it's been possible to bring back the part-time employee. The first condition on this, it is only open to those employees who had previously been furloughed, and to qualify for a previous furlough claim, then you needed to have been furloughed for at least 3 weeks, ending in the period 30th of June 2020. So it's not open to employees who had not previously been furloughed. Another restriction, and a little bit of an odd one, is that an employer can only make a collective claim for a group of employees as long as it doesn't exceed the total claim that he had made previously. So, for example, if an employer had claimed for a group of 5 employees previously, and then another group of 5 employees, they're not able to claim for a group of 10 employees. It would still be a maximum of 5 at any time, which is a bit of an odd restriction. And also the minimum claim period is for 7 days. On the employment law side, there's a requirement that for anybody who's brought back on a part-time basis, that there has to be an agreement in some form with them, which will specify the mix of working and non-working time. So all this has to be regulated and recorded. It's not just on an off-the-cuff basis. It needs to be set in stone prior. So I assume that checks will be able to be made at a later date that the claims complied with the actual work being carried out, and that that was all in agreement between both employer and employee. Now, the information that's needed for the claims going forward is that it all revolves around what they call the usual hours that an employee would work. And a claim must start and end within the same calendar month, and the employer must calculate and submit details of the usual hours worked, the number of hours they have actually worked in the claim period, and the number of hours that they have remained furloughed in the claim period. So this is different to the information submitted previously on the claims. A little bit more work to be done, and a little bit more recording to be done, which I assume would be available to be checked at a later date. Now, as regarding paying the employees, we've now got 2 separate sections. We've got the basis on which employees are paid for the hours that they've worked, and then the basis for the hours that they've been furloughed. Now, for the hours that they've worked, the pay rate that you need to use is the current pay rate. So anybody who's affected by national minimum wage, it will be the current year's rate, not the previous year's rate, which was used for the furlough claim. For the furlough claim, the rates were locked in as at 28th of February. So it could be the previous year's pay rate or previous year's national minimum wage rate. And that was used to calculate the furlough pay amount and the furlough claim. But now, for the hours worked, it needs to be the current rate. So either current national minimum wage or the current salary rate if there's been a pay increase since the beginning of March. Maybe not many employers will have gone through a pay rate increase with the conditions that we've been in, but it will affect some people. The national minimum wage, it hasn't changed a great deal, so it shouldn't make too much of an impact on the figures, but you will have the separate calculation of the hours worked and then the furlough. So again, there's a little bit more work in doing the calculation because you possibly have different rates applying to different parts of the claim period. Now, what I've put together is a couple of examples of how the calculation will work. To be honest, there could be 1,001 different examples that could be put together, but they all are fundamentally based on the same calculation, and that basically starts with the number of hours that would normally have been worked in the claim period. So with the first example, we've got an employee who, under normal circumstances, would work a fixed rate of 40 hours in a week and is paid on a monthly basis. This employee has been brought back to work for 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, and that is from the beginning of July, and the claim period is going to be for the whole of July. So the first aspect is to calculate the usual hours worked. And for that, we start with the usual number of contracted hours, which is 40 per week. And we divide that by the number of calendar days in the repeating work pattern. Now, for somebody who actually works on a weekly basis, this is the full 7 days. It's the 5 days working and the 2 days weekend. So the working pattern is the full 7 days. So we have to divide 40 hours per week by the 7 calendar days in the work pattern. And that gives us a figure of 5.7142 hours. We then multiply that by the number of calendar days in the month of the claim. Now, as we're doing that for July, which will be the first month that these claims are available, there are obviously 31 days in July. When we move forward to September, it will be 30, etc. So multiplying that figure by 31, it gives us a figure of 177.1428, and the process then is to round that up to the nearest one, and we arrive at 178 usual working hours in the month of July. The next part then is to calculate the actual hours worked, and this could be a little bit more awkward. Have to refer back to the calendar to check on the number of work days. So if this was a normal Monday to Friday working week, it's the number of Mondays to Fridays that there are in the month of July 2020. So if we refer back to the calendar, we can see that there are 23 working days within the month of July, and the the hours that are being worked for the time that the employee is being brought back is 4 hours per day. So we have 20 hours per week, and with the working days, say he works out at 4 hours per day, 23 working days in July, gives us a total of 92 working hours in the month of July. That then leaves us with the hours furloughed, which is simply deducting the number of hours worked from the usual working hours in that month, which leaves us with 86. So when doing the pay calculation, first part is to calculate the pay that the employee has worked. So that is the actual hours worked of 92 hours at their current pay rates, and apply that to the usual PAYE rates. There's then the furlough element of the pay calculation, and that will be 86 hours, and that will be at the employee's pay rate at 28th of February 20. So it's effectively the same pay rate that's been used for the furlough calculation so far. You've then still got the choice as an employer as to whether you pay the full amount of pay that a furloughed employee would be entitled to, or the 80% that you will get reimbursed by the government. That option is still entirely down to the employer. So it's a case of either adding on the full amount of the furlough pay calculation, or just the 80% that you're going to get back from the government. And that also takes into account the employer's national insurance and any pension contributions that would be applicable to the furloughed amount of the claim. Just a bit of a side note is that if any annual leave is taken during the furlough claim period, that should be classed as furloughed hours if that is paid annual leave. So just how to bring that into the calculation as well. And then the final aspect of it will be submitting the furlough claim, which again will be 80% of the calculated amount for the furloughed hours. I just have that detail there on the slide. Yes, it's just showing how the worked hours is calculated, and then by default the furloughed hours. So the next example, and this is a change of work pattern, is the basic difference between this and the first example. Now, this is for an employee who works 4 12-hour days and then is off for 4 days. So this particular employee has been brought back to work for 4 hours on the 4 usual working days in his work pattern. Again, the employee is paid monthly, and the claim period is again for July. So we start on the same basis as previous, that the initial aspect is to calculate the number of usual hours worked in that pay pattern for the month of July. So the number of hours that an employee is contracted to work in the pay pattern is 48. That's the 4 days at 12 hours per day. And we need to divide that number by the days in the repeating work pattern. And in this case, it will be 8 days. That is the 4 days on and the 4 days off, compared to the previous example, which was 7 days for 5 working days on and 2 days off. So dividing the 48 hours by the days in the work pattern of 8 gives us a calculated figure of 6. We then multiply that figure by the calendar days in the claim period. Again, for July, this is 31. So that gives us a usual working hours for the month of July of 186. So then moving on to the rest of the calculation. And what I've done here is I've assumed that the 1st of July was the first day of a 4 days working period. So again, it's a case of referring back to the calendar to find out exactly how many days will be worked by following that pattern throughout the month. And by doing that, you'll see that there would be 16 actual work days in July, and the number of hours that the employee is being brought back for is to work 4 hours per day. So that gives us a total worked in the month of 64 hours. The last part of the calculation then is to work out the furloughed hours, which is just deducting the worked hours of 64 from the usual hours of 186 to leave us with 122 furloughed hours. And the actual calculation of pay is on exactly the same basis. So we have 64 hours at the current pay rate, 122 hours at their furloughed rate, and then the decision as to whether the full amount of furlough pay is paid or just the 80% that will be recovered from the government. And then the final part of the task will be going on to do the furlough claim for July itself at 80% of the furlough calculation pay. And this is the same basis that is applied across the board. A couple of other examples of different pay rates that require a slightly different way of calculating the usual hours worked. Could be for somebody who has worked variable hours. Maybe it depends on how busy things are at different times of the year. So there's no regular pattern to their worked hours. It's quite varied, and the way that their usual worked hours would be calculated is the same as it would be for the furlough claims that had been calculated previously, and it was a case of averaging the number of hours over the previous tax year up to the point where somebody was furloughed, and using that average to apply to the particular month that a claim is being made for at the moment. There was also a choice of looking back at the same pay period in the previous year. So, for example, there may be somebody who works at particularly busy times when it's school holidays. So they will have very specific times of the year where they work probably considerable number of hours compared to what their normal weekly pay is. I could think of examples, somebody who might have a weekend job at a cafe or similar, but during school holidays they're able to work almost every day. They will have very specific payment patterns, and you can calculate their average hours by referring back to the exact same pay period in the previous year rather than doing on an annual average. Well, the fundamentals are still the same. It's usual hours, then calculating hours worked, and by default you've got the furloughed hours. It applies to weekly paid, 2 weekly paid, 4 weekly paid. Just the basis of the calculation is just slightly different in each case, but it would be quite time consuming to go through all the different varieties of calculation at the moment. But if anybody has any concerns over how to actually calculate in their circumstances, then please don't hesitate to contact us. And then, as a final matter, as I say, there's a variety of pay periods which comes into play, but they can all be worked around quite easily. Things that do cause certain problems are if somebody is taking unpaid leave or sick leave. They can complicate the calculation a little, and they would really need to be looked into on an individual basis to determine exactly what the pay and furlough claim figures would be. But say we'll be happy to help in any circumstances on that. And the last thing I would mention as well is that, unfortunately, in these circumstances, with the government schemes, there are always people around trying to make a bit of money out of that, and it's just to reinforce the fact that the tax office will not try to contact you by text, telephone, or email to request bank details for making claim payments into. They will only contact you by post, and often that's an invitation to log into their website to transfer the information over securely. So we are aware that there's a number of scams that are being carried out, both on claims, bounce back loans, and such. It seems to have been quite widespread. So yes, that pretty much covers everything that the basic issues behind the furlough claim. I think it's probably a case of getting into the calculations to get a feel for them, and once it's being carried out first time, it will be a pretty much a repetitive process. Although you need to be aware that over the coming months, the amount of the furlough claim is going to be reduced, and the employees are going to find that they are actually paying not only worked hours but receiving less of the furlough amount back from the government. And that will be the gradual process up until the end of October, when it's planned that the furlough system will end. So yes, I'd like to say thank you for watching, and please keep an eye out for any future webinars, and which we'll advertise through our newsletter as and when they arise, and these will generally be determined by any announcements that we get from the government in the coming weeks. So thank you and goodbye.